everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a full review of Tulsa King Season 2. Now there will likely be spoilers throughout this review, so just beware when going into this overall video, and you can check out my thoughts on the previous season of the show within the channel, and I'll leave some links within the description. So to quickly then recap at the end of the Season 1 finale, which saw Dwight arrested for bribery after being set up by FBI agent Stacy. This was coming off Dwight and his gang having won the war against the Black Adams in a brutal confrontation within the bar. Now when we look at Season 2, it picked up right after these events where we see Dwight is in jail, but his stint doesn't really last too long as his daughter helps bail him out after he defends himself in court. And after that, Dwight continues to go about his business, looking to grow his marijuana business ever more so in Tulsa. Now this season would see Dwight come across several antagonists, whether it would be rich oil earner Carl Fresher, who was the biggest marijuana supplier around. We have Bill Balafka, who was the crime boss within Kansas, and we also have Jackie Ming, who was the Chinese gangster who originally works alongside Fresher, but eventually has his own ambitions. And we also see tensions remain within the New York Mafia, as well as underboss Chucky, who struggles to maintain his own position within the Mafia family. And when reflecting back on Season 1, I thought Sylvester Stallone was absolutely great in the lead role, the reformed gangster Dwight Manfredi coming out of jail and being assigned to the quiet town of Tulsa to build his own base. And I really felt it was a performance where he could exhibit a much more of his real life charisma and screen presence than when we see within his normal stoic action roles. And the show itself can be very easily accessible and fun. All of the actors at times can be very likeable in some sense. But the biggest problem or issues with the show was that I felt it was too light. It was almost too laid back in its tone. Whilst being sold on its gangster elements, it was every bit more a quirky comedy, action adventure, and all of these elements put together didn't quite mesh together as well. There was also an extent of a lack of stakes, pace and momentum that ran right throughout the story. And certainly for the first 2/3 of Season 2, Tulsa King suffers from the same issues. The story very much just spins its wheels, where we see Dwight strutting around with authority, but nothing much else happening despite a huge influx of characters. We have countless scenes of Dwight monologuing within cars alongside his crew, bands playing in the bar, we see his daughter being shown how to shoot a gun, and just in isolation these moments are absolutely fine. But when they take up the bulk of the storytelling, you are scratching your head and wondering exactly as to where everything is going. Now eventually the story does pick up at around episode 6, where we see the war between Dwight, Fresher, Ming and Balakfa start to intensify. We see both crews take hits, whether it's Tyson's dad in an exploding car bomb or one of Balakfa's men being shot in a mansion, and we do finally get some escalation, some raising of the stakes, and the show does become far more interesting and compelling in the second stages of the season. Yet despite that, Tulsa King continually pulls its punches, never wanting to get too dark or too violent or serious. It sets up potentially dangerous or threatening scenarios, but they get resolved way too quickly and far too easily. We look at Tyson's dad getting hit by a car bomb and for the most part surviving with minor burns. We look at Dwight's court case where he's able to defend himself, where in any type of reality that simply wouldn't be allowed to happen. We look at Armand's descent in terms of his own life and situation, and that seemingly gets resolved within 5 minutes towards the end of the season. Once more, everything happens too easy, solved too quickly, again taking away all of the stakes. There seems to be no problem that Dwight can't fix. He has the biggest gang, he has all of the money, all of the answers. Yes, whilst he's the main boss, we understand that, but any threat that comes around his way, he seems to just handle no problem. We make the comparison, for example, with The Sopranos, where we look at Tony, who was the major crime boss, but despite that, there was always this underlying tension because of the several threats that were happening around him, whether it was from the feds, other crime bosses, or other members within his own crew, who you wondered constantly as to whether they would actually betray him. So there was always this tension surrounding the series which made it compelling to watch. But within Tulsa King, every conflict is resolved so quickly. We look in particular in the season finale, the 10th episode, where Dwight's confrontation or stroke negotiation with Fresher to take over the weed farm, and Fresher just backs down too easily. Dwight has this irresistible position, yet his crew are hardly skilled assassins or murderers, and I'm pretty sure they could be taken out easily if required. Another weak spot within this season was the various antagonists. Now, in the beginning, things were set up quite nicely as we had various other bosses for Dwight to go up against, and this had a lot of potential for lots of twists and turns, and again, at times, the series did manage to utilise that. But when we look at all of the villains, for the most part, they're pretty much weak sauce. We look at Thresher, who in the beginning was set up to be this overall kingpin that had authority over everybody else. In the beginning of the season, we see Dwight initially looking to build bridges with Thresher in order to impress him and expand his empire even further. But over the course of the season, we see Thresher has very little threat. He walks into certain negotiations without any entourage or any gangs, and he's pretty much threatened into submission, especially when we find out that Ming was the one who eventually initiated the car bomb that hurt Tyson's dad. Another character that was regressed was Chucky, who of course was the major boss in the beginning of season 1. Throughout this season, we see him usurped in terms of his position and power by Vincent. They ultimately discovered that it was indeed Chucky who did kill his father, and of course that doesn't fly within the traditional laws of the mafia, so they work their way to oust him. And after that, Chucky really kind of just drifts around, complaining and moaning, showcasing to be every bit the fool that the mafia deemed him to be, and he really carries no sway. Jackie Ming himself seems to be the most threatening antagonist, as we see him just killing his crew left, right and centre when it suits him. But again, we see how easily manipulated he is into getting trapped by Dwight's forces alongside Armand, and he's easily taken out himself. So despite all of the snarling and growling from each of the antagonists, they really turned out to be not much of a threat to Dwight, which is again, I think, a disappointment within this season. I would also say another major issue is the huge roster of supporting characters. Despite the lackability of the actors that play them, there are simply too many within this show. There are so many characters that you really could take out the story. They don't really offer anything substantial or integral. Many of them you feel have been written just to fill up time. As I mentioned before, we get so many needless scenes that don't really bear any real impact in terms of the plot, and are just there to pad out the overall episode. Out of all the supporting characters, only 2 managed to have substantial arcs, whether it was Tyson and his family, and of course the fallout from his dad. We had hints of him perhaps becoming carried away or a bit corrupted with the gangster lifestyle, but again, this is resolved very quickly. And as mentioned, we had Armand as well, who also saw his life spiraling after separating with his wife and coming into money issues. We see the very tense moment where he ends up robbing one of Dwight's businesses and goes on the run, but again, this is quickly resolved within the 9th episode. And again, these were the only 2 characters that had any kind of sustained journey throughout the season. Everybody else just felt peripheral and throwaway for the most part. So we do then quickly focus on the season finale, which saw Dwight again asserting his position after the negotiations, if you like, with Thresher, which saw him take control over the weed farm that was once controlled by Ming. We see a sort of unification between Balakwafa and Chucky before the shocking yet confusing moment when they go to meet Dwight within the bar, and then after Chucky seems to disrespect Balakwafa, he ends up turning around and shooting him. And whilst this was shocking in many ways, it really highlighted again the underdevelopment of these characters in terms of Chucky, and he ended up being much more of a waste, and it was really kind of a abrupt and wasteful way to end the overall character. And then we had the sort of cliffhanger at the end where we see the FBI, who have been largely absent throughout the season, finally decide to pass on some information about Dwight, and then we see Dwight being taken away from his cottage into some underground facility, and a shadowy figure tells him that he will now be working for him. So yes, it was the customary cliffhanger that helped set up the interest for the very likely season 3. But again, it just felt like a cliffhanger that was thrown in there without too much development. So after this second season, my thoughts are still the same. I overall like elements of Tulsa King. As I mentioned, I think Sylvester Stallone is fantastic in a role. It's one of his best that he's had for many years now. Again, allowing him to invest more in personality. And the show has a certain light, easy, very entertaining tone about it. But it really does need to amp up the stakes and the tension and find a much more compelling drive in terms of the storytelling, and not waste so many potentially great antagonists, which would then help maintain far more urgency, which I think is probably the biggest element missing within the show. the urgency, the lack of pace to really compel you to watch the series all the way through. As a result, the story can meander at times, and hopefully they can fix this going ahead for the likely season 3 coming out whenever it does. So here's my overall thoughts and feelings and review of the second full season of Tulsa King. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other further suggestions, movies or television series, or any other topics within the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover within the channel, then also let me know in the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.